Good evening, viewers. Since inception, ET Now has been at the forefront of delivering the sharpest business news to you. Starting tonight, we shift gears as we resolve to help every Indian rise with India. So every night at 9 p.m, tune in for a thought-provoking discussion as we put the spotlight on issues that have hampered India's development for decades.
Indeed, we will question politics and we will also question policies because India is no longer willing to wait, and nor are we. Welcome to the India development debate, and tonight we raise the big question: has politics hijacked the development agenda?
That's right, India is cruising ahead, probably emerging as the fastest growing economy in the world. Some studies predict India could zip ahead of the US to become the second largest economy by 2050, with one nation, one tax becoming a reality and the Modi government going full throttle on reforms. The spotlight is clearly on India, but can India afford to sit on its laurels, giving development a short shrift? More importantly, do we as a nation have the ingredients to make it to the top?
Indeed, after all, we score rather poorly on key socio-economic parameters like per capita income, infant mortality, public health care, and of course, fixing the infrastructure deficit. There is already the talk of jobless growth, something a highly populated country like India can ill afford. We may be on a high growth trajectory, but farmer suicides continue to haunt us. India is rising, but are all stakeholders, including industry, doing their bit to take us to the next level? How to make the elephant dance, and that is a big debate right here on the India development debate this evening. India, a nation of over 130 crore people with half of its population under 25, isn't just the youngest but also the most ambitious. Way back in 2000, India just had a single metro transit system. In 17 years, there are now 38 metro systems under operation and also under construction. In 2000, there were no expressways, and now there are close to 950 of those crisscrossing all across the country. Way back in 2000, less than 3 people out of every 100 had a phone. And now India is a 121 crore mobile subscriber and the fastest growing telecom market in the world. But development is not just restricted to technology. Life expectancy has grown by 4 more years. The fertility ratio, which is the number of children per woman, has fallen to a healthy 2.3. Only about 40% of females over 15 were literate way back in 2000. Cut to 2017, close to 65.5% of our women are literate. So while things have improved, there remains a lot of ground to be covered. And we are no longer willing to wait and be mute spectators. We want to write our own destiny, and we want to script it soon. Why are 13 million people jobless, and why aren't they seeking jobs? Why are only 18% of engineering graduates employable? Why is our per capita at a measly $1,875 compared to that of China's at over $8,800? Why is investment not breaking ground, and why is credit offtake so dismal? Moreover, why are women who are so far more educated not working? Why are there only 27% of women in India's workforce, which is the worst in BRICS and only better than Saudi Arabia and G20? Why are women raped and molested, and why is the conviction rate of crimes against them only at 22%? When will we develop? What has failed us? Have Gaurakshaks and godmen hijacked the development agenda? Too bad if it has, because it will no longer be tolerated. Because it is time now to rise with India. It's time to discuss, debate and decide. Because development can no longer be denied. All right, joining us, a very stellar panel as we debut with the India development debate. We've got Maithili Busnurmat, our consulting editor, Ajit Rana, the chief economist, Aditya Birla Group, Nalin Kohli of the BJP, MV Rajiv Gaura of the Congress Party, Sadanand Dhume, fellow at American Enterprise Institute, R. Jagannathan, a senior journalist and a very noted commentator. Thank you each one of you for being with us. We'll kick off things with you, Jaggi. The topic really under discussion this evening is, has politics hijacked the development agenda? I'm going to put this as a straightforward question to you. Has politics really done that?
इतना इसको छोटा लग रहा है.
Well, I think Ruchir Sharma of Morgan Stanley said it best. He found he found a strong disconnect between political outcomes in elections and economic outcomes. You saw, for example, Madhya Pradesh doing a lot in agriculture, but the first major farmer agitation this year happened in Madhya Pradesh. So I think politicians are recalibrating their strategies and they're focusing a lot on what will deliver them re-election rather than what will actually do good in the economy over the long term. And we saw that during the last second half of UPA also. All the growth depleting policies that we are facing now started in the second half of UPA when actually they had the land bill, which is actually screwing up your highway development plans today, because they wanted to appease a landlord class, which is parliament is full of them. Then you did something called, you went on cutting capital expenditure because you could not raise oil prices, and because of that consistently you had the government cutting down important capital outlays and public sector investment. So again and again, when you keep doing these things in order to get yourself re-elected, you're going to, the economic outcomes and political outcomes are going to be different. Same thing has happened now in the last 3 years, where Mr. Modi feels it is important for him to chase black money because that's important for his political branding. But that has slowed down what could have been a slightly faster growing economy if we had not had demonetization, or if we had not had gotten this chase of black money, if we had done all those things. So all those things are impacting things, but they are helping politically, but economic gains will happen a little later. I think there is a disconnect now.
There is a disconnect. That's an important point that you're making, Sadanand Dubey. Do you agree with Jaggi there that there's been a recalibration of political priorities, that at the end politics is now beginning to sort of shift the narrative? The development narrative has been hijacked in New Delhi.
I do largely agree with Jaggi. You know, as with most things in India, there's a glass half full way of looking at it, and there's a glass half empty way of looking at it. Now, if you take the long view, I'd say things are certainly glass half full. You know, India has kicked into a sort of larger rate of GDP growth since the 1991 reforms. It has moved ahead. It has made quite impressive gains in per capita income and so on. My worry really is that this government had a huge opportunity to really grab the reform agenda and put in place things that many of us have been talking about for a long time. And it seems very clear now that that is not the agenda. The Modi government has turned out to be much more cautious on market-friendly reforms. And frankly, it's done some rather bizarre things like demonetization. So the question really is, with this very young population, are we going to see a demographic dividend, as most of us hope, or could it end up being a demographic disaster? And frankly, the jury is still out on that question.
I quite appreciate the fact that you've shifted the discussion to demographics, because I'm going to put Ajit Rana ji in a tough spot here. I'm going to ask you the direct question. Could our demographic dividend, at least from where we see things, does it threaten to become a demographic disaster, a demographic demon that some people are now talking about?
Yeah, Supriya, we know that the challenge, if you talk about jobs, is to create almost 10 million, or is it 10 million jobs at least per year. But I think the discourse should change a little bit, because these jobs are not going to be created by large companies, not even by railways or the armed forces or the postal department or Tata's, Birla's or Reliance. These jobs are going to come from small and medium enterprises. And therefore, if you want to create 10 million jobs or 1 million jobs a month, you need to create at least 20,000 to 50,000 new enterprises. That's the rate of creation we need. So we need to change that slogan from 1 million jobs a month to 20 or 50,000 new enterprises every month. Now that's where the ease of doing business agenda kicks in, or is very important. I can tell you from first-hand anecdotal evidence that despite so much focus on ease of doing business, and you know, it has dimensions at the central level, at Delhi level, at state government level, and even at local municipal level. The fact remains that while in some of those metrics, like access to electricity perhaps, and you know, that has improved, but by and large, you try opening a new company or a new business, there are still far too many hurdles. There are still far too much paperwork. There's still too many, in fact, there was a stark contrast because somebody I know started agro business, agro processing. It took him some 6 months or and the same company had to open a satellite company in Singapore. It actually took them like 2 days. So if we need 1 million jobs a month, we need at least 20 to 50,000 new enterprises to be born every month. That should be the slogan.
All right. Before I throw it to the politicians on the panel, and I do want to tell our viewers that you cannot get a better panel than this. We've got probably the finest minds, apolitical, independent, sort of experts, economists, journalists. You cannot get a better panel than this, and I'm sure Nalin Kohli and Rajiv Gowda will give credence to this panel that's joining us on the India development debate this evening, because we want to contribute to nation building. We're not here to have this, tu meh fight. So, Maithili, a word from you before I toss it to Nalin Kohli and Rajiv Gowda. Maithili, do you agree with this statement, this broad thesis of that politics having hijacked the development agenda that this government came to power with? And more importantly, the point that Supriya made about this agitation that we're seeing. When I look at thousands of people protesting on the road, over conviction of a man for rape, I feel, I'm infuriated, because at one level I feel it's because these people have no jobs to do, because probably they've been failed on development. Probably Punjab and Haryana states where agriculture's growth has completely collapsed, which is why they're out in the street. So would you agree that this is probably a sort of an outlet for that?
Well, yes, certainly. It is a sign that whenever you have poverty, you have no jobs, you have no education, the people are bound to get carried away much more easily. They're much more gullible. So to that extent, the appeal of Ram Rahim certainly is explained by the fact there has been no development. Punjab particularly has suffered because there is a huge problem of drugs over there, which that repeated state governments have failed to acknowledge. Now, this is an issue, but the fact is that in a democracy, change is always going to be much slower than in a country like China. In 1947, China's per capita income was below that of India's. Today, it is 5 times that of India's. Part of the reason really is because the difference in the political systems. In a democracy, change will necessarily take a little bit of a backseat. It will not get the kind of precedence because government cannot ram through change, and that is partly, of course, not entirely the justification for the fact that we are so far behind, that we haven't really caught up with all our East Asian neighbors. But the fact is, political systems do make a difference. Certainly, politics does not entirely hijack economics, but we do pay a price. That is inevitable in a political democracy, Sandeep.
Okay, we pay a price in a political democracy, but I think the price is too dear. Let's take it across to the politicians. And Nalin Kohli, thank you very much for joining in. You've been patiently listening to every commentator so far, barring, of course, the Congress, and we'll get a word in from them in just a bit. But what do you make? What is your defense this evening? Why has the Modi government that came on the development plank not been able to live up to it completely? We all thought he was the Vikas Purush, and which is why people voted him in against the whole narrative of corruption and everything else that India saw. What happened in those last 39 months? Why did the narrative of development get hijacked by distracting things like politics, Gaurakshaks, the godmen, and other things like that?
First of all, Supriya, thank you. It's, I think, a very good initiative to have a program that tries to go beyond just the standard debates and tries to bring a little depth with the kind of panel that you've got on a subject that I think these things we should discuss in a more serious manner. Second is, it'll take me a few minutes to respond to what everyone has said. I don't agree with the point being made that politics has hijacked the economic agenda. And I'll make my case over 7 or 8 points. First is, reform means different things to different people. The priority changes. We are a country of too many contradictions and too many various strata of society. In a sense, an 18th century kind of a mindset or an 18th century living standard some people are there, and there is a 21st century. Everyone on this panel probably is that. Could be anywhere in the world. Now, for a person who doesn't have a toilet, open defecation is a reality. The toilet is a huge agenda. It changes the whole perspective from a woman who had to go to a field. It's a big issue. For someone else like us on the panel, interest rates would be something that we would monitor and talk about. So therefore, when a government comes in there, we need to bear in mind economics and politics both are important. It's not one or the other. And it only can't be. Now, you can't talk to a hungry soul, remove subsidy on food grain, because that's what an economic model would mean. That would suit us. But on the other hand, for them, subsidy is critical. It's a matter of livelihood, life and death. So therefore, when you look at it, reform is taking place. And let me give examples. If there is a targeted approach to direct benefit transfer, that is eliminating corruption, eliminating duplication, sending it directly to where it needs. That means the distribution mechanism is being done. So the government cannot walk away from a social agenda. That's one. Second is that, when you bring in a question like a Ram Rahim or something, now explain to me in which developmental model or an economic theory can you explain to a human being who is willing to sleep with less than what they can eat, that means has less food than what they want, still thanks God and says, thank you for what you provided me today, provide me tomorrow. So therefore, you have to look at the whole cycle a little more holistically. I don't think the Modi government has moved away from agenda. There have been big things that have happened. Financial inclusion after 70 years is becoming a reality. It's a huge thing. I mean, the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, Mr. Jaitley wrote about it, the Prime Minister has spoken about it. 30 crore, that's 300 million accounts. 17 crore for rural accounts. 21 crore RuPay cards.
Nalin Kohli,
these are big things. Give it up. You and I, all of us are giving up gas connections.
Nalin Kohli.
I want to see, I'm making a few points and I'm happy to debate them further. Yes,
right. Okay. Nalin Kohli, fair enough. I get your point. And you spoke about social development. If there has been so much of progress on social development, why does India still rank at 131 in the Human Development Index of the UN of the UNDP? That's something I want to talk about. But let me get in a word from Rajiv Gowda. Rajiv Gowda, we have some questions for the Congress as well, because Maitri spoke about China.
Jobs, because a lot of people spoke of jobs. I mean, I need to make a point on jobs.
Sure.
I haven't finished.
We will. Nalin Kohli will come to you on jobs. We'll come to you on jobs. But I don't want one individual. I don't want the BJP to hijack this discussion, so to say. Let me get a word in from Congress. Rajiv Gowda, counter Nalin Kohli, the points that he made, and also a specific question, because many would argue that the reason why our development is what it is, the reason why our per capita income is only $1,800 when China's is at $8,800, the reason why Maitri spoke about China. Let me give you an example of South Korea. At the time of independence, both nations got independent around the same time. South Korea's, a per capita GDP was a quarter of ours. Today, it's 10 times of ours. I mean, look at the way countries have developed and who's governed this country for 60 years. It's, if this isn't a vindication of the fact that the policies of of Congress government after Congress government has probably failed the development agenda of this country. Would you concede that?
Oh, absolutely not. Let me just take you through history. Think about where India was in 1947. Think about what the larger economic consensus was about the role of government, about the role of the public sector across the world in terms of what the consensus was about and what is the capacity of the private sector in the early years of India's development. Therefore, the original thrust of state-led investment and industrial growth, etc., certainly did its job in terms of giving us an initial boost. That may have outlived its purpose, and we may have needed to have liberalized much earlier than we did. But the fact is that we did liberalize and then unleash the forces of entrepreneurship and the private sector. Then, much more recently, over the 10 years of the UPA, we saw both a spectacular 7.6% average growth over those 10 years, which is really something that maybe you've forgotten. And the other side of it was also the creation of a very, very significant social safety net and rights-based programs, which ensured that those who were left out, who were falling behind in a more market-focused economy, would also have a place at the table, would also have a support so that they could pick themselves up and move forward. So I would totally reject the idea or some snap conclusion that we missed the boat. We've come a tremendously long way, and we are now the third largest economy in the world, and for that you've got to give credit to all governments along the way. In fact, I would actually counter the thesis that you're coming up with that politics is derailing development. If you look at what the BJP is doing, they are taking forward many of the programs that we had initiated. Jan Dhan Yojana is a continuation of the financial inclusion programs where we had taken bank accounts and bank branches and correspondents to every village of 2,000 and more. So this is a logical next step. Along with financial technology, innovation, etc., we're going to see, and then the whole telecom transformation, which ensures that there is a phone and possibly a smartphone in most people's hands. You will see another kind of empowerment, another kind of platform for service delivery, for education, who knows what else. So there is a lot of movement that's taking place over time. We've been trying to electrify villages, and they are now trying to ensure that every last village is covered. So Vajpayee started the Gram Sadak Yojana, which did a very good job, and we continued it. And that kind of infrastructure is something that makes a huge difference to rural India, to access to markets, and to alleviation of poverty. So basically, this is, and if I wanted to make a political point, I'd say that many of the things they opposed, they've adopted.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you on exactly that political point, Mr. Gaura, because I want to take this discussion forward with Sadanand Dhume. And Sadanand Dhume, I think the question that some of us would want to ask is, with 282, were we expecting the BJP to just carry forward some of what Congress was doing? And I'm going to name a couple of things that people are not liking. A farm loan waiver for one, Manrega for one, the whole jam bit. It's all very good to include, but this is repackaging at best the whole Jandan movement that the government has launched. So the Congress, yes, is patting its back that the BJP is carrying forward some of what we did, but should the BJP be doing this at all? I mean, why is the BJP doing exactly what the Congress did, which is appeasement of sorts? Farm loan waiver is one such thing that comes to my mind. Manrega, I thought the Prime Minister criticized it and then goes ahead and does exactly that. In fact, I think the highest ever allocation made to Manrega.
No, I think that's a really good question. And I think to a certain extent in this discussion, we're talking past each other. The politicians are comparing India today with India in 1947, and it's clear that India has done quite well. But I think what Sandeep and you are doing correctly is comparing India with other countries in Asia. And if you take that comparative view, India in economic terms has not done that well. That's simply a fact. I'm not sure that I would, blame, democracy per se. But if you sort of, look at this grand Indian experiment, what is it? It is the first country in the history of the world to have universal suffrage before it had universal literacy. And the implications of that on economic policy, unfortunately, have not always been good. And we see that with the Modi government, because here many of us believed that it would learn the lessons of failure of 45 years of socialism. It would learn the lessons of the slowdown in reform, particularly under UPA 2, and it would reboot the economy dramatically. In the end, we find that politics is sticky, and they are much, much more cautious. Nobody grudges people building toilets or any of that. I mean, I think that's just sort of, those are all good things, or opening bank accounts for the poor. Excellent. Those are all good things. The problem is that is all that is being done. Very little is being done to solve some of the deeper structural problems that hold back growth and hold back job creation. And that, frankly, has to be the biggest worry.
Jaggi, very cautious, says Sadanand Dhume, and do you agree with the point that he's making that we can't compare India today with India of 1947? We've got to compare India to its peers, and the restlessness that we see is because our expectations were very high with this political establishment, given its mandate, given its track record, given the sort of nature of leadership, and you've sort of you've written extensively in favor of some of the policies of this government and of the Prime Minister. But would you share the disappointment of Sadanand there and the fact that they've been way too cautious?
Yeah, I mean, after a mandate where you got a majority of 282, the expectations were sky high, especially after Mr. Modi positioned himself as the man who changed the face of Gujarat, and that he was so pro-business friendly, market friendly. All those things turned out to be his previous avatar. The next avatar was to shift the BJP to the left of the spectrum so that it can get re-elected continuously in this country. So I think he has consciously made that shift, and his language therefore is looking more like UPA 3, which talks about financial inclusion, those kind of things and all that. But within that broad shift. I think he has done a lot of reforms which will have huge benefits. Like I think there has certainly been a clampdown on black money which will benefit after a year or two once industry gets adjusted to the new normal. All the old favors to crony capitalists are gone. I think slowly, I think you will find that as industry adjusts, they will start reviving investment. Third thing, the subsidy reform is probably one of the biggest reforms this government has done, which will actually benefit you after a while since you are slowly eliminating the wastage there. So though he has not cut down subsidies in a fundamental sense by eliminating people from it except voluntarily, but this will benefit in the thing. And GST also will deliver after a year or two. My guess is that the slow and incremental reforms will deliver after, but probably only in the second term, which is why he has changed the goalpost from Achhe Din by 2019 to 2022. And I think that's where the shift has happened. And I think I would suspect that this is the key change that has happened. But where I think he has gone wrong, I think he has not realized the problem of the banks, and those are getting rectified a little too late.
You know, Jaggi, I'm going to take something that you just said. I think the incrementalism, it's creative incrementalism is what his chief economic advisor said. And Maithili, let me ask you a direct question. You know, when I was in college, we were a developing country. I think it's been some 15 odd years I've been out of college. We're still developing. Is it time we make our peace with the fact that even reforms in this country will be at best incremental? And so we should also make our peace with the fact that India will grow at 6 to 8%. We will become a developed nation at some stage, but it's many, many decades away. And 6 to 8% is at best what our politicians can deliver for us, because there is politics at stake.
You know, Supriya, if we were to grow at 6 to 8% consistently for a number of years, we will get there much faster than we think today. And you know, in this context, I'd like to quote what the former Prime Minister, about whom it was often said that he was overrated as an economist and underrated as a politician. And what did he say? He said, politics is the art of the possible. And I think that is something that the Modi government has realized. Because take the case of land reform. When the government first came to power, they were very keen on undoing the damage. Yes, and I use the word damage, Mr. Rajiv Goda, with the Land Acquisition Act as it was passed, because it made it almost impossible for any large-scale industry to acquire land. But when they found that they were hitting their heads against a wall and there was just no way they could get that change through, given the fact that they didn't have a majority in the upper house, I think they realized that they have to be more pragmatic. So I think that is very important in a democracy. And here again, I think Sandeep spoke about South Korea, but let's not forget, South Korea was not truly a democracy, and South Korea is a much smaller country, much more homogeneous a population. So given the kind of country that we are, so diverse in every which way, in fact there is no, there's no part of India that really has very much in common with another part of India, except the slow emerging Indianness that is emerging in all of us, as it were. So in a country like India, I think you necessarily have to go slow. So it is important that you slow and steady wins a race. You cannot do anything very dramatic, and I think if you are expecting dramatic change, that might not be safe also. It is important to carry people along with you, otherwise we could founder completely.
Slow and steady wins the race. Nalin Kohli, Maithili sort of summed up beautifully what is a political predicament for the government at the centre. Do you agree with that assessment, that given the sort of diverse nature, it's better to be slow and steady and not be sorry? And the fact that the point that Jaggi made, that there seems to be a conscious shift towards, and Sadanand also said that more left of center thinking. We thought this is a government with right of center economic thinking, right of center sort of ideological thinking as well. But we get a feeling now that the economic thinking is not as right of center as most of us anticipated. It's probably more left of center than we would like. Nalin Kohli?
Well, I wouldn't fall into all these definitions of left of center or right of center. Because again, just to repeat myself, that it means different things to different people. The government is for everyone. The government is for everyone who voted for it, didn't vote for it, from which strata, upper strata, middle strata, whatever. And the government has to care for each one. The government can't care only for a person that it likes or would like to follow that agenda. So I don't think so. I think we need to live with the fact in some areas there's going to be a faster growth in terms of faster decisions, very fast. In some areas it has to be incremental. You can't bring change also too fast. For example, if you have to look at the subsidy story, you have to look at it holistically. You need to see that agriculture reforms, the farmer who's committing suicide, he's able to remunerate himself to the level that he's just not only producing farm produce and is unable to take care of his basic needs. So therefore, it's a whole story. Then you start finding that people move out of that cycle, which is debt or other lack of credible employment for a complete year. All of that needs to be reformed, and steps are being taken there. So that would be a cycle that would take longer. On the other hand, if you're looking at, say, jobs, you are at one end talking of, yes, there's Make in India, you'll talk of ease of doing business, you will talk of the issues there, but yes, for example, in 1100 days that the government was there, 1200 laws were repealed. They were outdated, they didn't need to be there. Or there have been a total of 7,000 reforms, small, big, whatever. So work's happening. In some of those areas, it's very fast. But, it's a matter of, which area we pick up. If you pick up a segment, it can be looked at in totality, fast or slow. If you look at the whole thing, I think broadly we are in the right direction, and that's critical. The government is not at war with itself. The government has a clarity of the direction it has to go, and the Prime Minister is implementing that. So I think that's what I would look at it in terms of the others. Mudra, my last point, is that we have so far given out almost loans worth 3.5 lakh crores to about 7 crore plus people. Now these are self-employed professionals who will in some way set up a small business that creates further employment. So when we talk of IT, we forget the startups. We only talk of IT. So I think holistically we are in the right direction, and for me that's very critical.
Okay, holistically we're in the right direction. I think there's a lot of impatience in India, and I think that's what we are trying to echo here at ET now. And while I agree with Maithili and you that slow and steady is better than being sorry, but I think there's also a lot of impatience creeping in. Let me ask the Congress party, while you will criticize the BJP for what they have not been able to achieve, for the fact that they've been distracted by the, in their development agenda, what is the counter narrative that the Congress party has today? Because I think the problem in India today is that the opposition at large, and I'm talking about the main opposition, the Congress as well, you don't have a counter narrative. You don't have a credible narrative that one can turn to and which explains why the BJP has scored political victory as well, despite the big experiments that could have economically failed and perhaps will fail us in the long term, demonetization for one. But look at how it, won seats in UP. I'm asking you, does the Congress this evening have a counter narrative, counter economic, counter development narrative?
On the economic front, our counter-narrative is about empowerment and about unleashing the entrepreneurial energies of India's youth. So that is something, along with that, we have policies coming out of the heart, essentially strengthening the social safety net. But along with this, we also recognize that government service delivery is something that really needs to be fixed. And you're seeing a decline across education, across health, etc. And and there are whole new challenges emerging. For example, an epidemic of non-communicable diseases, things of that sort. So we need, so basically we are looking at foresight in terms of working with both the public, private, and sort of social sectors in terms of coming up with a place for each in terms of addressing India's developmental challenges. And this is a work in progress, but we will build substantially on many of the programs which were initiated during the UPA years, especially the rights-based approach, which refined the way people could go about, demanding certain rights, whether it is education or health or food safety and food security, things like that. We have to. One of the themes that's sort of underlying the discussion here today is this tendency to ignore the fact that there are large numbers of people in the country who are still poor, who are striving to get out of poverty, who with one bad illness will fall back into poverty, etc. And so it's imperative that we do have measures that will help them climb out of that kind of a situation, and that's very much part of our agenda. So I would not only look for reforms that focus purely on freeing up the market. We have to have a role for the government, and over the years, as the private sector picks up and becomes a larger share of economic activity, the role of the government will substantially be with the social safety net. And that's pretty much where we're going. And remember, subsidy reduction, for example, on the petroleum front, is something that we brought in. Direct benefit transfer is again through Aadhaar. These are all initiatives that were
this is not the forum.
So
fair enough. We don't want to hear what you've done in the UPA. that point is noted. You've sort of tried to put together a counter narrative. Let me get a quick reaction from Sadanand Dume before I go to Dr. Ajit Rana in the studio with us. Sadanand Dume, you've heard the Congress counter narrative. Does it sort of add up? I thought the people of this country rejected the politics of empowerment or this entitlement-based policies which the Congress sort of championed over a period of 10 years. You know, I could be called a skeptic because I believe in more pro-market policies. But what's your own view? Do you think that this counter narrative is what could potentially bring the Congress back to power, or is it credible enough as an alternate development agenda to this country today? Sadanand, that's for you.
If you just listen to both of the politicians on this program, and you get the feeling that all you have in India in terms of the two major choices are frankly two different brands of leftism. Now, everyone is speaking about poverty, but of course we should care about poverty. The debate really is, what is the fastest way to end poverty? Do you end poverty with more of the same, what we've seen in the past, or do you end poverty by taking a different approach? Now, it looks like both the politicians are broadly on the same page. But there's a philosophical divide in the world between whether you want to give the poor a hand up or a hand out. The difference between Congress and BJP is only this. Both give handouts. Congress calls it a handout. BJP pretends it's a hand up. But they're both doing essentially the same thing.
So both doing essentially the same thing, but the debate is also around what about millions of Indians who still are poor? Dr. Rana, what is it that you see has been done in the last 39 months or needs to be done in the next few years for poverty to be alleviated? It's a valid point indeed. You know, we're talking here in Mumbai, sitting in our studios, but there are people in India who go to bed unfed, and we can't forget about those last mile people in that line.
First of all, Supriya, the show's title is Politics Hijacking Development. Yeah. So let me say very categorically that there can be no development, economic development, social development, or human development without politics or without political will. So in fact, political will is absolutely integral and a prerequisite for good development in all spheres. So it's not a bad thing. Secondly, if you're trying to illustrate or from the comments of the two politicians that there's not much difference between the strategies, which I think that's a cause for feeling good or celebrating, because as Maithili said, we have a very diverse polity, a very diverse nation. But in the last 25 years, in fact, if the direction, if not the pace of our economic reforms has been steady and unchanging, despite 7 different prime ministers, different colors of shades of political parties, actually that is something that reflects national consensus. It is not a bad thing. When political parties fight fiercely to come to government, that's fine when they magnify their differences. But once you are in government, I think that the time is to minimize differences and maximize commonalities. In fact, there should be a common minimum program. One more point, Supriya, that people compare with China. If there's one comparison on a scale of billion, it can only be, I think, with China. But the political systems are so different, and not to speak of the fact that the diversity in India is much more. And let's not forget the huge human cost that China has paid in terms of, maybe 30, 40 million people died in the great famines and the leap forward. We forget all those costs that society has paid, huge costs. On the other hand, whatever you might say about India's economic, per capita incomes, we have built very solid foundational institutions, whether it's the Election Commission. This is a week to celebrate the judiciary. Such an important and very powerful pillar of our democracy. These institutions have come because of our evolution. Mm-hmm. Now, I want to also emphasize, while we get caught up with this discussion, let's look at the positives. The macroeconomic context is in a very sweet spot in India for the last 3 years. We have a very moderate inflation, record inflows of dollars coming in, current account deficit is very, very manageable. The fiscal deficit is excellent. In fact, the IMF just came out with a report this week saying that the fiscal deficit in China may be 12% of GDP. India is barely 3%. Right. So the macro context is really is excellent. And let's not forget what I consider as 4 foundational reforms. I think Jaggi also mentioned it. The fact that we have this GST, one nation, one tax. Secondly, we have an insolvency, a new code to resolve bankruptcies and hopefully make a dent on the NPA problem. Third is that we have a very well-defined monetary policy framework, which wasn't there earlier. Right. And fourth is this whole Aadhaar, notwithstanding the privacy angle, but this Aadhaar framework, which enables to not only minimize leakages, but actually target subsidies, which I think Rajiv Gowda was talking about, better targeting of subsidies. These are four things which are going to be helping us in the medium to long term.
Sure. Okay. I think we're more than halfway into the debate, and there is it's a beautiful panel. Ajit Rana and Maithili Busturmat believe that we need to be cautious. There is good work that's happened, and don't be impatient. Whereas Sadanand and probably Jaggi believe that we should be a little impatient. I do want to tell all our panelists at this stage, before I take into a short break, that we at ET now want to be champions of development. Starting today, we repurposed our channel, our brand, because our motto, our credo is Rise with India. So, we're here to support growth. We are here to support development, because we believe we want to help every Indian rise with India. So we inherently believe in the India story. We inherently believe that we're a country that's a growing nation. We want to sort of fast track that growth. That's the objective. That's the purpose. That's the intent of this debate. Gentlemen and ladies, I'm going to take a short break on that note. But when we come back, we're going to talk about two specific areas. One is the farm sector. Is enough being done to alleviate the stress in the farm sector? And of course, we'll talk about some of the social parameters as well that Nalin touched upon briefly. Back in a moment with the India development debate.
Great to be back with you once again on the India development debate, and like we said, we're going to put the spotlight on India's farms, the agrarian crisis that's brewing, and what is the plan to double the farm income. It's a good slogan. How are we going to walk the talk? Time to put the politicians once again on the mat on this. And Nalin Kohli, I know the intention is good, not just because farmers contribute to the biggest vote bank, but agrarian crisis is something that most politicians will take note of. What is the plan to double farm income? I know it's very well said, but I'm just trying to understand, how will farm income double by 2020? And also the other question is, farm loan waivers is a legacy of the UPA. Economists, social commentators, opinion makers have all denounced this. This is bad economics. This leads to poor discipline of credit. This doesn't help the farm sector in the long term. Why are you bearing the cost of this? 2,57,000 crore rupees is a rough estimate of how much farm loan waivers across states will cost the Indian exchequer.
Well, first of all, if I had a little advance notice that, we were going to speak on a sector in detail, I would have come a little more prepared on that sector particularly. It's not that work's not being done. I don't have the complete picture, but what I do know, generally speaking, agriculture has to be dealt with holistically. I'm using the word again. It can't be any more just with, short-term intervention. So, for example, when you link the agriculture sector to the lab, there are definite things being done. Prime Minister Modi has spoken himself about it. We are pushing that research in the lab has to translate in actual benefit on the ground. Only then is the farmer being able to. We saw that with the Green Revolution, but we need to have that kind of a revolution on a daily basis. The second is, how do you increase productivity? Soil health card is a critical factor there. If you know what your output can be based on the nature of the soil, obviously there is a position for you to start going for the right crop. So the pattern changes. On irrigation, water has been a success of Gujarat. It has been a success of other states also. By and large, if you would see in India, the BJP-ruled states have done well on agriculture. Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh are two good examples, broadly, who have done exceptionally well on agriculture. So coming back to that, then Kisan credit card is the basic problem with agriculture is because it's non-remunerative, and it's non-remunerative for multiple reasons. There's underemployment. The mandis are a problem for the Kisan in terms of the farmers. They don't actually help. In many cases, it kills the farmer because they are not getting the right price at the right time. Sometimes they have to sell a tomato for 20 paisa a kilo or 1 rupee a kilo, when in retail it might be 30 rupees a kilo. The gap is too much. So therefore, there is now ENAM, which is the portal. Now, in India, the fascinating thing is crores of people do join. But there are crores of people you still need to reach to.
Right.
That's where the challenge comes. So if you've got 7 crore, 9 crore
Nalin Kohli,
you
we
still
understand.
have another 20 crore to reach out to.
Fair enough.
That's the challenge that comes.
All right, fair enough. We understand these were all policies laid out by the government and the finance minister in the last couple of budgets, and we sort of know its long-term implications. Maithili tracks the agriculture sector very closely. Maithili, in your own assessment, given these sort of policies that have been announced over the last years, is that enough for us to grow to double farm income? I mean, my understanding is that will mean we'll probably have to, the agriculture sector will have to grow at 15% year on year for us to be able to double farm income. Are we anywhere close to being able to do that, Maithili?
Not at all. In fact, we're far, far away from that, for the simple reason that in agriculture, we really haven't seen the kind of reform that we saw in industry in 1991. We need to release the animal spirits in agriculture, not cramp the farmers, because anytime, for instance, if you see there's a rise in the price of any agricultural product, what do? We immediately clamp down on exports, and we ensure that the price of that product does not rise. So the poor farmer suffers both in good times and in bad times, which is why we're seeing that despite Mr. Nalin Kohli spoke about how Madhya Pradesh has done so well in agriculture. If so, why are there so many farmer agitations in Madhya Pradesh? There is a contradiction there. So clearly we need to do something to improve productivity, to improve income levels, and the only way we can do it is if we allow true reforms to come through, even at the same time as we increase public investment in agriculture. Let us be very clear that in the agricultural sector, the private sector is not going to do large scale investment. So whether it is rural roads, whether it is irrigation, whether it is power for rural power, these are all things that the public exchequer must do. Unfortunately, public investment in agriculture has fallen over the years. Successive governments have just completely neglected agriculture. They've used the farmer whenever it's convenient, and they've dumped him whenever it's inconvenient. So I think it's high time we started thinking in terms of how do we get the farm sector to perform like the industrial sector, respond to market signals, and wherever people are below poverty line for any specific reason, because of crop failure, because of drought, there we have market mechanisms like insurance. So this is something that the government has just done a lot of lip service to. They really haven't walk the talk at all. So all this talk of farming double income has to be taken not just with a pinch of salt, but with a bucket of salt.
Okay, Ajit Rana, I'm going to put this one to you then. Farm loan waivers, politicians would always like us to believe this is a lifeline that farmers need because there is farmer suicide that's happening in the country. Maithili is right to point out that this isn't a long-term solution. There hasn't been unleashing of animal spirits. Which side of this debate are you on? Does one allow Indian farmers to keep committing suicide all across? Because, it's good to have long-term solutions, but those are utopian, I believe.
Of course not, Supriya. The farmer suicides is actually like a tip of the thing. That is a signal of how bad the farm stress is. Incidentally, it's not farm income. It's not doubling of farm incomes. It's actually doubling of farmers' income. And the farmers' income can come from non-farming sources also. So let's not forget, it's about rural economy, and it doesn't all have to come from farm GDP. But that's a small point. About farm loan waivers, yes, actually, for example, in the state of Maharashtra, the chief minister was on record of trying to resist this thing called farm loan waivers, but because of a domino effect from Uttar Pradesh, now 8 other states have announced, and as you said, cumulatively something like 3 lakh crores. What happens in farm loan waivers is, first of all, you have not explored other options like restructuring loans, moratoriums, temporary stoppage of payment of interest. You have simply just waived off the loans without any consideration to people who are trying to repay. Secondly, it's actually a slap in the face of all the hardworking farmers who repaid their loans. So you got to take care of them as well. Thirdly, it creates a perverse incentive for the next year, for the future. So on every conceivable way, it's really a bad idea. And I know that for example, in Maharashtra, there was a lot of effort to not go that path, but once the domino started, it couldn't be avoided. And what happens is, for example, in a state like UP, the economic survey says because of the farm loan waiver, 13% cutback in development spending. We're talking about development. So in fact, we had really tragic and horrible things happening in Gorakhpur, but that is directly related to healthcare spending. And stuff like healthcare spending or development spending had to be cut back because of the farm loan waiver. By the way, not a single rupee goes to the farmer. The farm loan waiver means simply giving money to the banks to wipe, to clean the balance sheets. So nothing actually, no liquidity goes into the hands of the farmer. So in every possible way, the farm loan waiver, I know it is very politically very, very difficult to say this, and of course, when the situation is very dire, no politician wants to oppose farm loan waivers, but I think it's a cumulative this is the cumulative outcome of many, many bad missteps taken much earlier.
All right, let me get closing comments from our panelists. Rajiv Gowda, to you first. Even as we've been critical of a lot of things, on one count, this government deserves credit, which is on tackling corruption. If you look at the Transparency International corruption perception index, our ranking at 79 out of 176 countries. It was 94 in 2012 when the UPA was in power. Would you concede that on this one count, which is an important metric of development as well, that from the point of view of foreign investors and domestic investors, corruption has come down dramatically in the country? Rajiv Gowda.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. The latest numbers from the RBI show you that all the money that was out there in circulation has come back. So how did demonetization tackle the black money problem? It did not. Then look at the BJP government's track record when it comes to anti-corruption measures. You see that the Whistleblower Protection Act has been weakened, the Prevention of Corruption Act has been weakened, the Right to Information Act has been weakened. You have a Lokpal bill that was passed in 2013 without a Lokpal being appointed. So the overall edifice that is supposed to help ensure that corruption is tackled is not at all in place. And in fact, the other innovation that they've come up with, electoral bonds, is actually going to worsen the situation because it ensures anonymity and nobody will know who contributed to whom. So overall, this whole story of whatever Transparency International is measuring is certainly not measuring this government's actual track record when it comes to anti-corruption measures.
All right, completely out of time here, but thank you very, very much each one of you for joining us right here as we debut with the India development debate. Over the last 1 hour, we have debated what is really ailing development. One thing is clear, that economics can never be devoid of pure politics completely. But we strongly believe that politics needs to aid robust development.
We also believe that development can't just be about economic growth, but social justice and human development are equally critical. A country can't boast of being developed on the basis of numerical economic growth with rampant crime against women and children dying in hospitals across India. Hopefully, politics will not hijack the development agenda, and if it does, we will question policies and politics to ensure it doesn't happen. All our panelists, Nalin Kohli, Rajiv Gowda, Sadanand Dhume, R. Jagannathan, Ajit Rana, Maithili Bushnurma, thank you so much for taking time out and joining us on this debut edition of India Development Debate. I hope to see more of you on the channel and on this show every night at 9 p.m. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Keep it with ET now, because coming up next is Top 10 at 10 with Tanya Bharadwaj.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/ETNow.